It is September 12th, 2025, and as Poland invokes Article 4 of the NATO treaty, claiming that it shot down Russian drones that got into its airspace, there are a number of questions. Questions that include, what types of drones were these? Were they decoys? Were they held together with duct tape? And how did they get in certain locations? There seem to be much more questions than answers here, especially as Russia said that it did not send those drones into Polish airspace. A lot of concern still about a possible false flag attack being used to drag the NATO alliance even further into an even more direct war against Russia. Doesn't seem to be happening just yet, but could it happen in the future? And what should we be keeping an eye on when it comes to the overall drone war of attrition that we are seeing between Russia and, well, really Russia and NATO in Ukraine? We got into all of the latest with a special guest earlier, so let's take a listen to that conversation now. Joining me now to discuss is international relations and security analyst Mark Sleboda. Mark, thanks so much for taking the time to join me.
Rachel, thanks for having me. It's always an honor and a pleasure to be on the show.
Always good to have you. Now, I want to get your take on the latest here, as this week Poland reported that it shot down 19 Russian drones that it said entered its airspace, but Russia says that it doesn't have any designated targets in Poland. Now, this also comes as Belarus says that it shot down some drones that went astray due to electronic jamming during an exchange of strikes between Russia and Ukraine. And it claims that it warned Poland and Lithuania at the time. So, can you take us through what happened here and the significance of this skirmish amid fears that we could see NATO in a more, well, even more direct war with Russia?
Yeah, so amidst all of the hype, the furor, the headlines, the fall, outrage, very quietly, NATO officially put out the official response from NATO. They do not consider this an attack on Poland. I mean, everything else is just kind of noise, right? That was put out there. And notice the response, from the US government is essentially nil, right? They're not responding to this at all. So everything else is just noise. So, I mean, the claims are that Russia was conducting another major, as is almost nightly, missile and drone strike on the Kiev regime in Ukraine. This one was particularly hot and heavy in West Ukraine, right? They were hitting targets in Lvov, in Zhytomyr, and Ivano-Frankovsk. They're probably hitting some stuff that just came across the border from Poland, to be perfectly honest. But amidst this, there were claims that several, and I've seen varying numbers about how many, Russian drones, or shall we say Russian-produced drones, entered Polish airspace. And now, this wasn't they briefly crossed in the Polish airspace while maneuvering for a better line of target on their site. No, we're talking some 50 kilometers into Polish airspace. And with one report I saw putting them at 300 kilometers into Polish airspace, which, okay, it's a report. What can I say? So there were various claims by Poland then to have brought them down. If so, they did so very belatedly, that they all crashed in the Polish airspace. And it seems that some of them may have been brought down without any damage to them whatsoever from some of the photos I've seen. So again, take the Polish claims that they shot all of these down with about as much seriousness as Zelensky announcing that all Russian strikes have been brought down as well. Right. Now, what we do know is that from the pictures from the video in Poland is that they took pictures of several Russian Gerbera drones that I have not seen any incident or claim that did not involve a Gerbera drone. Now, a Gerbera drone is a decoy. It is a mock-up of a Garand long-range strike drone. It's usually made of extremely cheap materials, lightweight materials, usually plywood, right? Or some other high density plastic or something of the sort. Mostly they're used as decoys. They can also be used for reconnaissance or as repeaters in signal repeaters amidst an attack by Guran drones. It is theoretical that they could contain a very lightweight strike package, right? Because they're made of such lightweight materials, right? And thus they're incredibly cheap that they could carry a very light, but nothing like what an actual Guran strike drone. What they're designed to basically look like the profile from the ground of a Guran while they're flying above, so that the Kiev regime or whoever is wasting air defense assets going after them when they don't really present any damage whatsoever. And all of the footage that I've seen released from Poland shows Gerbera drones, and none of them report any type of explosive or strike package or anything like that. Secondly, I saw some of these supposed Gerbera drones found on the ground in Poland, supposedly brought down. Very suspicious, right? I saw one of them that was literally held together with duct tape. And I'm like, you think the Russians really set this up? I mean, I will admit, I've got things in my house that are held together with duct tape that probably shouldn't be, right? But it's duct tape. It's a wonder. But this might be pushing a little too far. In another incident, they show a Gerbera drone that evidently, despite being supposedly shot down by the Poles, right, landed perfectly, like without any obvious damage whatsoever, on top of a ramshackle chicken coop, right, in Poland. And we're not talking like a good, nice, solid chicken coop. We're talking like some old, ancient wooden slat thing. Somehow, this Gerbera drone made a perfect landing on this chicken coop without actually damaging this ramshackle chicken coop. And I got to imagine if it was falling out of the sky, either whether it's out of fuel or it was actually brought down somehow without any physical damage that I can see or whatever, you would think it would fall through the chicken coop at the very least, right? The chicken coop would, no, perfect landing on top of a chicken coop, almost like it was placed there. So there's a lot of fishiness going on. The Belarusian chief of the general staff, essentially their chairman of the Joint Chief, he put out a statement. Evidently, he contacted the Poles before these supposed Russian drones entered Polish airspace, and said that the Belarusians had noticed amidst drone strikes on both sides that there had been the use of electronic warfare, and that apparently some drones had gone off course, and that the Belarusians themselves had shot down some drones. The Poles aren't commenting on this comment by the Belarusians whatsoever, but that's not necessarily expected, shall we say. So there is a possibility. It is certainly possible to take with electronic warfare, some electronic warfare assets. Russia has them. I have to assume that the West has some of them as well. Have the ability, in some cases, to actually physically take over the signals going to drones and land them where you want to, right? So that is something that can be done. The other possibility that is being put forward, it must be said, on Ukrainian Telegram channels, is that this entire thing is a false flag. That these were earlier drones and mock-ups, captured or, I don't know, duct taped together maybe by the Kiev regime and then flown into Poland right when Russia was launching a major drone attack that was focused on West Ukraine in order to try to make look like it was Russia launching an attack on Poland in order to draw Poland and thus NATO uh, deeper into the conflict, into direct conflict with Russia. Well, if that was the case, NATO seems to have put the kibosh on that pretty quickly. And it must be said, even the Polish president seemed to have waited some time before he made any response. And the response from Poland has simply been to invoke Article 4, which is consultations, right? And that could be over anything. It could be over, hey, Zelensky was trying to drag us into the war again. Could someone slap his hands? That could be the consultations. That appears to be the most likely scenario. The Russian Ministry of Defense, meanwhile, put out a very terse denial, saying we didn't target anything in Poland. They also noted that the range of the Gerbera drones makes many of these claims that how deep it was into they were in Polish airspace unlikely at best or physically impossible. However, if they were launched out of Ukrainian territory by the Kiev regime, then that fits just fine. So, now, this being said, I believe that Russia has every right to actually strike inside Poland, right? We've had the open admission, even by the U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio at one point, that this is a U.S. NATO proxy war on Russia, right? The Kiev regime's their logistical rear is literally Poland and Germany. So I think Russia is well within their rights. And I would like to see them respond to that. But what I want to believe is not that there's no evidence that is actually what happened, other than this screaming outrage, from certain quarters. Now, those who want to draw NATO and the U.S. into war with Russia will, of course, milk this entire incident for every bit that they can, right? Russia is attacking Poland. We must do something, right? Meanwhile, NATO is quietly saying that's not what happened. Is anyone paying attention? No, not really, because headlines dominate, right? Inflammatory comment dominates. But at the end of the day, the US and NATO aren't doing anything, and the rest is all just rhetoric and posturing at this point.
Yeah, and it's interesting to see exactly as you're saying there that argument isn't brought up about what does Russia have the right to do. Instead, it's just all kind of in the moment. And that was my biggest concern too, was the possibility of some sort of false flag attack to try to draw the NATO alliance in further, especially at a time when you have Russia. I mean, I know that Kiev was reporting that Russia had launched yet another record drone and missile attack this past weekend. They said that they hit a government building for the first time. And I'm curious too, when it comes to this drone war of attrition that we've been talking about, the role that you see it playing in the overall war and the impact that Russia's drone attacks are having on Ukraine, especially given Kiev's lack of air defenses and given the fact that we are now weeks into this sort of nightly barrage. How are we seeing it play a role in the overall war?
First of all, just briefly with regards to the possible false flag attacks, it's actually a bit of deja vu. Remember, we've been here before. Earlier in the conflict, there were claims that Russian missiles entered Poland, and it was only later admitted that they were actually Kiev regime air defense missiles. Right? So we've been this type of attempt to drag in before. Now it's simply being done with drones instead of missiles. Secondly, Russia, their almost nightly long range strikes are getting bigger and bigger and bigger. We're almost reaching that point that the Kiev regime said that Russia would be at by the autumn, that they are producing and capable of launching 1,000 Garan strike drones a night, right? We had over 800 launched over the weekend, over the last few days. Now, the number one target of these drones is still military industrial facilities. And that is having a real effect, right? For instance, the Kiev regime was conducting, with Western help, they were building their own Sapsan ballistic missiles, right? At multiple facilities across the country. Well, Russia had good intelligence, and over the span of a few weeks, they destroyed every single facility, right? With drones, with ballistic missiles, with hypersonic missiles, with the whole quiver of their long range strike package. And that Sapsan ballistic missile program, it doesn't exist anymore, right? So obviously, this is having an effect. It's limiting the Kiev regime's ability not only to move equipment around the country, but it's also limiting their ability to domestically produce things. We know that the West was all hot on the idea that they're going to start military production within Ukraine. Yeah, not so much. We've seen facilities where Germans were assisting building missiles blown up. We've seen the Turks were near completion of a Bayraktar strike drone factory, and last week that was blown up as well. We saw also last week there was a U.S. facility in western Ukraine, right on the Hungarian border, and electronics that was making high tech semiconductor components for the use in drones and missiles, and that was destroyed as well. So it's really limiting their ability. And Russia is quite often letting them invest all of this money into these facilities, get it nearly up and running, and then hitting it, allowing them to sink as much energy and money and everything into these facilities as possible. But we also have the word that increasingly Russia is not only using these long range strike drones, these Garans, as strategic, against military industrial infrastructure facilities, but increasingly they're being used in the operational rear against the logistics of the Kiev regime as well, because they have so many of them to spare at this point. Think of what is involved. If you've got, say, somewhere between 500 and 800, strikes every night, imagine the team that is required to assemble a list of targets and provide the intelligence necessary to launch these things, and then do a damage assessment on it every single night, hundreds and hundreds of these strikes. It's a truly large endeavor. And it is showing dividends at the front lines, because the Kiev regime is short of everything, right? And that is having its cost. Not only, of course, are they short of manpower, but they're also short of missiles, and they're short of air defense, and they're short of vehicles and everything that would be required. And increasingly, Russia is also, of course, targeting drone production facilities. We again hear the word from the Kiev regime that, where once there was near parity in levels of, say, FPV drones at the front line, that now Russians outnumber them 4 or 5 to 1. And part of that is Russia's higher production, and the other part is the Kiev regime's own production is simply being pummeled into the ground on a nightly basis. And the butcher's bill is coming due.
Yeah, as you've been talking about for years now, right? This war of attrition, it doesn't happen overnight, but you do start to really see the effects of it. And the last thing I wanted to bring up was this New York Times article that I thought was interesting, because it actually seemed to have a little bit of truth to it. It's got the title, Putin's Message to Ukraine, Europe, and Trump, I Won't Back Down. And in it, the author notes that to Ukraine, Putin's message is that he is convinced that he has the upper hand militarily. To Kiev's allies in Europe, Putin's warning is that they face danger if they follow through on their plans to eventually deploy troops to Ukraine. And to Trump, Putin is signaling that he will not compromise on his core demands, even as he claims that Russia is still ready to make a deal. I'm reading all of this going, okay, where's the lie? Basically, he does have the upper hand militarily. He is giving that warning to Europe. Look, we don't want to target your troops, but you're risking putting them in a very dangerous situation. How do you view kind of the state that the Western media coverage is in when it comes to its handling of the war right now? Because exactly as you're laying it out there, they don't exactly get to be like, oh, Kiev is on some, spring offensive at the moment. No, it's a lot of bad on Kiev's side, and there's not much rallying that they're able to do, even as they're kind of admitting the truth about where Russia stands, whether they want to or not.
Yeah, I've seen this formula in quite a number of Western mainstream media outlets over the past couple of months, where they won't admit that Russia is winning. Right? They've stopped claiming that the Kiev regime is winning, and for the most part, they've even stopped claiming that the war is a stalemate or something like that. But the way they do the phrasing now is Putin believes he is winning. Right? Not that we believe Putin is winning or Putin is objectively winning, or at least the Russian military is winning, but Putin believes he's winning and is operating from this, diplomatic angle. And the question is, well, considering all the evidence on the ground, why isn't Western politicians acknowledging this and operating from that in the diplomatic space? I mean, that is the real question that should be raised from these type of articles. Because as you've pointed out, everything that he claims that Russia believes is actually the objective truth. And it must be said, it's the objective truth that on the battlefield, that we have been pointing out for several years now, right, going forward. And they're coming very late to the game, and they're still not admitting it themselves. But, now it's the Putin believes he is winning. It's like progress, I guess, a step forward, right? But they're still not there. They can't admit that they're losing, right? Because I mean, they are intimately involved in this. Whatever Trump, oh, this is Biden's war, it's not my war, blah blah blah. The collective West, including still the U.S., is at war against Russia, and they're losing badly, and they can't find a way out. They continually toss around new fantasies of new sanctions packages and everything. My favorite one is this latest, where the Europeans and the Kiev regime are pressuring Trump to enact what he threatened at one point, the 100% secondary sanction tariffs on anyone who buys Russian energy. Although I take it that means anyone except for the EU, because they're at least number 4 on that list. And much higher when you consider that anything that goes to India, most of it gets resold. And Trump is like, yes, I will do that as soon as you do. And when you put 100% tariffs on everything from China and India, then we'll immediately follow suit. And I see this as Trump pushing them off and calling their bluff, because they know very well that their economies can't survive that they still get Russian energy. They just get it laundered through India. Everyone knows this. It's been freely admitted all across the Western media, even if they don't want to admit it themselves. And they can't do it. They can't put 100% tariffs on India, and their economies, they would, completely lose what energy they have available, not only to, dream of an economy, but also what their own citizens need at this point, especially, of course, heading into the winter months. It becomes a very bad situation. So they keep, whether it's, I don't know, they seem to have given up. I haven't heard of a new wonder waff in a long time. There's no new miracle weapon, that they're theorizing could change the course of the war. So all they've got left is sanctions and dragging it out at this point. But they're still not giving that up. And even though Putin believes he's winning, they can't seem to come up with anything that would tend to make them believe they're winning again.
Yeah, it would be all too easy for them to say, "Oh, Trump is delusional, right? He thinks blah blah blah. He thinks that NATO can win this war," and to actually call it out in a way. But exactly as you're noting there, they, being the mainstream media here in the U.S., are so involved. They were the ones selling this war in the first place, so now they have to continue to ride it out because they have a stake in it as well, and they cannot admit that Russia actually does have the upper hand militarily, or that Russia is taking the time to warn Europe, hey, you guys do not want to get involved in this. It's like they're like, oh yeah, Putin's just saying that, and then we'll see what they have to say as NATO keeps getting more increasingly involved here. But goodness, certainly a lot at stake here all around, and I always appreciate you taking the time to join me to break down all of the latest here. International relations and security analyst Mark Sleboda, and be sure to check out his exclusive content on Boosty for paid subscribers that goes much more in depth than we're able to get here. Mark, thanks so much for your time and insight.
Thanks for the shameless shilling. It's always an honor and a pleasure.
If anything in this video resonated with you, be sure to like it, share it with your friends, leave a comment, and as always, don't forget to subscribe. And if you want to keep up with all of my work, make sure that you're subscribed to my page on Substack. That's rachelblevins.substack.com. That's where you'll find ad-free videos and new weekly episodes of my exclusive series for paid subscribers called Sanctioned. You can also check out Sanctioned over on my page on Patreon. That's patreon.com/RachelBlevins. As always, thank y'all so much for all of your support, and I'll see you next time.